6th. I'm Councilwoman Jamie Torres, honored to be Council President, and want to go around the room for introductions. And we'll start with our council member online.
Good afternoon. Candy Sadabaca, District 9.
City Council at Large.
Good afternoon, Stacy Gilmore, District 11.
Good afternoon, Paul Cashman, South Denver, District 6.
Good afternoon, Kendra Black, District 4.
Good afternoon, Joel Clark, District 7.
Good afternoon, Amanda Sawyer, District 5.
Good afternoon. Since everyone else is saying it, good afternoon, Chris Hines, Denver's Perfect 10.
Great, thank you so much. And I'd like to welcome Director Laura Aldretti from Community Planning and Development. Our one briefing today in Budget and Policy is the 2023 Work Plan. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Laura Aldretti. I'm the Executive Director of Community Planning and Development. I think we're going to spend about 30 minutes. I'm going to spend about 30 minutes walking through some slides and then open it up for Q&A. We've really created this over the last couple of years to come into before you all at Budget and Policy, just to really have a conversation about where we are headed based on our budget and our priorities, and understand, we talk throughout the year about what your priorities are, but want to make sure there's alignment with understanding the priorities. So with that, I will get started. Here's just a quick agenda. We'll do a quick overview of 2022, look at our focus areas for 2023, major projects coming to council, and then of course Q&A. So just as a reminder, we're responsible for building community through visionary city planning and ensuring safe and sustainable buildings. Starting at the plan side of I kind of do at the top of the funnel, with large citywide plans into getting into neighborhood plans, and then begin looking at zoning code, rezonings, building codes, updating those as you all passed that in early January. Thank you. And then into design standards. Of course, preservation is a big part of the work we do, and certainly with a focus on adaptive reuse. Really thinking about culture, history. In a couple weeks, we'll be kicking off, I'll talk about this in a moment, the American Indian Context Historic Study, and so we're really excited about that. We had such great success with Nuestras Historias, the Latino Chicano Historic Context. So that's great work we're continuing to do. Obviously, development review is a big part of the work that we do around construction, looking at how buildings apply to onto the land and parcels, and making sure that life safety component is there, and then ultimately inspections, including zoning and neighborhood inspections. So a couple major highlights that we're proud of. We created the Expanding Housing Affordability in partnership with HOST, looking at ensuring that there was affordable housing in all future residential construction. A portion of those, we also just created the new, or updated the new Denver Green Code, requiring commercial projects to incorporate more sustainable features, paving the way for higher achieving projects in the future years, towards our goals for sustainability, aligning with CASR. And then we designated 4 Denver landmarks in 2022, and as I mentioned, completed the first historic context study of the Latino, Chicano, Mexican American peoples. So places that we are proud around our innovation really focus on how we process things, which I'm sure your constituents have shared some of their concerns with you. We have heard it as well, as we have seen the imbalance of the market economy continuing at a strong pace throughout the pandemic, while we became or had a recession budget. As you know, we had no budget for 18 months. And that imbalance really created these backlogs in both site development, neighborhood development, which is most of the times you hear it as site development plan or SDPs, and then also in residential review. And so we called them blitzes, and it's really about testing and being innovative and thinking outside of the box, and willing to think of it as a pilot, where we create metrics that we're going to test ourselves against, go through the process. In this case, for site development, neighborhood development, we did a 2-week blitz where we excused staff from attending meetings, returning phone calls, emails, and let them just do their work. And as a result, we saw a reduction of 34%. We also of the backlog, and then we also do a after action, right? We take time to say what went well, what didn't work well. If we're gonna, should we continue this? What changes would we make? So right, so it's kind of the process that you would do for any kind of science, social science experiment of how do you keep getting better. Similarly, with residential team, we developed a minor resubmittal process where you no longer just go to the bottom. If you just have a simple minor resubmittal, you need to just get that final check. You no longer go to the bottom of the pile. You go into a quick pile that we move through pretty quickly, and that provided a lot of relief for our homeowners and small contractors. Also, we brought on, with your assistance, brought on a plan review consultant, which we're continuing, and we just coming through the process right now to expand that contract. We've had a lot of success with that, and they are very specifically focused on just reviewing building code. Because our zoning code, even in single family, is complex, we feel it is much more efficient for them to focus on building code, which has much more standardization across the United States. And then let our experts focus on zoning. So again, great, you'll see some of this a little bit later, but great success there where we are seeing a 70% increase in weekly production. So what's nice about these charts is we're starting to see what exactly happened during the pandemic. 2019, just to note, in terms of the issued permit volume, that is the greatest number of permits issued that we have on record since we have been taking data. So it was always characterized as out of the norm. So it's a very high number. So I think we are now, interestingly, the market felt normal and robust even during the pandemic. And as we're coming out of the pandemic in 2022, you see that we are continuing that strong economy in the construction and development industry. In terms of, on the right-hand side, log volume, you see that, again, supporting this idea that the economy remains, while there have been changes and some unknowns, the construction and development industry continues to operate at a high volume, in fact, higher than what it was pre-pandemic. So by the numbers, $5 billion, which is one of the highest numbers we have reached in the past recent history. I do want to note that paired with that is a significant increase in construction costs. So some of what we're seeing, while some of it is just this high volume of permits coming in, some of it is also, you're seeing this dramatic increase in construction costs. We also, as we came out of a recession budget where we had no budget or no ability to hire new staff, since in a year's time, we hired over 100 positions, which is about a third of our agency. We have slightly over 300 people in our agency. So that includes promotions, but as I think we all were in the conversation about what's happening to our workforce, where are they going, why is everybody resigning? This is we experienced it as well. Let's see, anything else of note? Oh, the other piece I just wanted to note on this is the 35,000 calls, right? Like, we are so much about customer service. We have, I believe just before the pandemic, created a customer service department. And we are now beginning this first quarter, we'll create a strategic plan for customer service and then share that across our agency. We hear sometimes, I think we get some criticism around what our customer service is, and so it's really going to be a focus of ours this year to not only build a strategic plan that will go across the agency, but then implement it. But the volume is tremendous of how many calls we get that we have to pick up the phone for. As I mentioned, the 100+ positions that we filled in the past year, some of it was for the Affordable Housing Review Team, which has done exceptionally well, and we've had a lot of great successes about moving affordable housing projects through our process. We also, of note, hired the city's first chief urban designer and feel that that is a good decision for the city and CPD to begin having a position about what do we want the future of our city to look and feel like. Again, the third-party review for residential has been very, very helpful and proven to be a good move for us. We think it's limited to that role. So while we have a backlog for site development plans, because it is mostly zoning related, we don't think there's there's nothing additive for bringing on a third party in that role. On calls, overtime, anywhere we could squeeze anybody's time out to come join us in those reviews, we've done that. Bringing back some retirees, and again, this year we're really focusing on training new staff and the culture of our agency. This is proof and point. I'm really proud of the residential team for the work that they have done over the past 3-4 months, where you'll see the review times, the average weeks to complete is really starting to drop. And that's both our staff being able to really focus on the zoning code as part of the single family review, and the third party just focusing on the building code. But we're really happy with the work that our team has done. So 2023 focus areas. I'll just say that there's a lot, and as there should be, right? We're a large organization. We have to continually build this city forward, and we're tied with so many other different agencies as we should be. So I tried to create a number of just categories to think about this. And for me, and as I represented in the budget conversation that we had this fall, culture and strategy of our organization is my primary focus for this year. And that is really about retaining, recruiting, and empowering our staff for 2023. Just given the high turnover rate we had in 2022, the challenges that we continue to have with hiring new staff into our agency, we think making sure once we do hire them and the folks that have committed to CPD, that we keep them, that we have a healthy culture, and we have a strategy about how we're listening to them and how we're making changes to our agency. So a couple ways to do that. I already mentioned the customer experience strategic plan that will be developed in Q1. The strategic plan and employee engagement committee, as you all know, there was an engagement survey taken in this past year, and that's really about looking at where areas that we did good and how can we keep pushing that forward, and areas that we need to improve on, and working with our staff to develop methodologies for how we're going to get better at that. The other thing, we, of course, like every agency, have an equity, diversity, and inclusion committee. It's really about folding that into our overall CPD plan. I don't want that to be something that's a side issue. I want that to be directly integrated into everything that we do as an agency. The other areas, climate action, as you know, there was some great leadership on the council to help us move forward with building and energy codes that just passed. And so it's really, this year is really about the implementation of that. We continue to move forward and advance the adaptive reuse program. And then in urban design with our chief urban designer, creating those outdoor places program, which we have just moving through our regulations for that, and then we'll be continuing to work with those businesses that want to participate, whether it's above the curb or below the curb, in those occasional instances where there is street closure. We also are in the process of, we just closed the RFP for the Spear Boulevard Cherry Creek feasibility study, looking at how we really celebrate and create better access to the creek, as well as thinking about the gateway that Spear represents. And then, of course, how do we seam those two sides between Auraria and downtown? And then related to the adaptive reuse program is the office conversion. that is helping to support Central Downtown, 16th Street reconstruction, and then Acoma Street, which is a bond project moving forward. It's a Dottie-led project, but certainly from an urban design standpoint, critical to our work. And then we just wanted to acknowledge our partnership with you all in what we're working on in 2023. Mobile home text amendment, safe outdoor spaces text amendment, modernizing zoning variances and the BOA, expanding housing affordability implementation. I wish it was just everything, all ordinances were just done once you all vote on it, but there's a whole nother step of implementation. So continuing that, there's a number of design overlays that we've worked with some of you all on. And then just continuing to reduce permit backlogs as you all hear from your constituents, and we try to be responsive to that. Just an overview, quick overview of what our customer experience strategic plan focus areas are. So making sure we really in depth understand customer and what they're experiencing as well as what their needs and desires are, and then building a stronger customer experience. So again, how do we not just recruit and retain the right people, but then how do we support them? How do we support our staff with their proper training? It also creates consistency. Meeting our customers where they are, delivering a great experience virtually, phone, email, in person. We have some of that in place. Again, it's not across our entire agency, so how can we do that better, create better equity to allow people to meet with us online and not have to come downtown necessarily, but allow for all options. And then making sure we're constantly hearing, adjusting after action, and then looking at our metrics and making improvements. On the adaptive reuse program, we're really focused on two areas, East Colfax corridor from Broadway to Yosemite, and then upper downtown, the office to residential and mixed use. So we have a dedicated project coordinator to assist with these projects. We have regulatory guidance for most common code roadblocks, experience by those who are submitting into our process. And typically those are ADA issues in these kind of 1960s, 1970s buildings, as well as life safety for fire. Stairwells tend to be problematic when they're 60 years old. And then we are looking for other incentives to lessen project time and cost as well. From the preservation standpoint, as you'll recall, in 2019, we added cultural significance to what is allowed as a marker for preservation, and making sure that we're collecting all of the histories of Denver is critically important to that recognition of the significance. This is our second historic context study, and we have a launch party on the 25th. And that we're very excited about. We've been working with the American Indian Commission through Derek Okubo's department. That's really helped, continues to teach us and lead us in the ways to show up and make sure that we're hearing all the voices in that community. So major projects we've got coming this year. A lot of MPIs. We've got the West Area Plan that we're wrapping up 3 years. It started during the pandemic. Thank you, Councilwoman Torres. Right, but just how, that was a little bit longer process because it began during COVID. We were trying to figure out how to best connect with the community. But also, again, really proud of where that plan has landed and the extensive conversations that we have had with the community there. So we're looking to bring that through in March and April to you all for adoption. The Near Southeast Plan, you see the neighborhoods here, continuing to really along the same lines of creating community-led vision. Again, working with council and the neighborhoods about how do we better access the community and how do we show up where the community is. And partially through the pandemic, but kind of everybody's stretching their muscles around community engagement, but we feel we've had some good successes with that outreach. And then near Northwest, again in District 1, currently going through public discussions and drafting of the plan, chapter by chapter. And we believe that by fall or winter, we will reach completion of that one. So this will be, we'll be completing phase 2 or phase 3 after these 2? Okay, thank you. We'll be completing phase 2. Each phase had 3 plans in them. And since we began the neighborhood planning initiative, and we anticipate by mid-year, we want to take a step back and evaluate the program. Again, this is kind of on this theme of our methodology for innovation. What have we done well? What areas do we need to improve on? It probably needs a conversation with all of you that have experienced it and haven't gone through the process yet to say, what needs of your community have changed? How do we need to show up in that engagement differently? And what could we have done better? And what did we do well? We're always open for that commentary as well. And then we've identified those areas for phase 3, which the first one coming in phase 3 is the Southwest Area Plan. So just moving through, as I was talking about earlier, having walked through the planning part of the work we'll be doing and more into the zoning and building codes and administration of those ordinances, of those plans and into ordinances. Again, the zoning code amendments that we're looking to complete in 2023 is accessory dwelling units. I think we've got some good participation in the task force, the steering committees for that from the council. We expect to see a text amendment into planning board in April. The Outdoors Places program, again, coming one item that was a positive out of COVID was how do we use our public rights of way more for people and less for cars. So we're between Dottie and CPD have had some great partnership to bring that forward. So we have a draft above curb standards have been released, and we're looking to work on what does that look like on private property. So the above curb standards are really still within the public right of way. And those zoning code changes, which will be about the private property, are expected in June sometime. And then advancing equity and rezoning, we started in January, a year ago, and currently working with interagencies to understand the feasibility of some of the solutions. We have, as noted, we have had a lot of staff leave. We had a lot of new hires. This project in particular has taken a bit of a pause, but we'll be starting back up shortly. So just to dig a little bit further down into the Outdoor Places program, again, it's updating the zoning code to allow for the temporary outdoor patio program, to allow it to be in a permanent setting. And then, as I mentioned, a joint project with Dottie to update the standards. The distinction I will call here is what is driving, whether it's in the public right-of-way or on private land, is really the form of the built environment. So if you think about Larimer, Larimer Square, which is much tighter, traditional urban environment, the only space allowed is, available is in the street, from the building facades into the streets. Once you start getting into some of the younger parts of our city where it is more about the car, and there is not just in our public rights of way, but also on our private properties where there are also parking lots. There are opportunities that those small businesses are interested in shifting the use of that parking in particular. So we'll be having those conversations moving into the later winter and spring. Again, I noted advancing equity in rezoning, and just want to make sure, again, this is looking at how do we update the process, but not actually any rezoning of properties. So just to touch on the city council sponsored citywide zoning code amendments, I mentioned safe outdoor places, so we'll come before you again in March. Again, great work that has come out of the pandemic and has given us an ability to have more flexibility to address people experiencing homelessness and that ebb and flow as we're trying to find places for them to have shelter. And then the mobile home unit replacement that is coming, went through LUDI and is continuing forward. And then the modernization of zoning variances that will impact Board of Adjustment. And with that, I will take questions.
Thank you so much. And you did it well under 30 minutes. Well done. Excuse me. We have a few council members in queue. We'll start with Councilwoman Black.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Laura. I just had a question about your customer service. And how is that different from someone calling PocketGov or 311? And we, as council members, receive a lot of customer inquiries in our offices.
Fair enough?
And so I'm just wondering exactly what that is and.
Yep. So when one of your constituents calls 311, 311 will identify what department it goes to, and then they'll forward it to us. And then probably a typical case for one of your constituents might be zoning neighborhood inspections. And then it goes to our ZNIS department, and they follow up on it. Customer service, we are looking at it in a couple different areas. In particular, where we have focused on it is in the intake for residential review. So that's really impacting homeowners who are updating their bathroom, whatever small remodel, or the contractor. And from an equity standpoint for us, that is where we think we need to focus because typically a homeowner, doesn't have a lobbyist, right? They don't typically work in the system. Small contractor has probably got a bunch of irons in the fire moving through the system, but is still not, still probably as a small business owner has a smaller, thinner margin, right? So if we can provide higher customer service there, then I think we, that from an equity standpoint, that is where our mission is on that. Similarly, oftentimes you're still dealing with small businesses coming through site development plan. And again, focusing on where those small businesses where we can have better customer service or more intentional customer service at that level is where we are focused.
So if someone called and they talked to your customer service representative, would that person be the liaison to the person who's reviewing the plans?
Yeah, not necessarily. Typically, those folks have already started into the process. And so we have an intake group, and they will have contact via email or phone through with that direct intake person. So it'll be back and forth with them once they submit through e-permits. So it's not like all phone calls are coming into one person and then it's being distributed out. It's not like a call center in that way. Mm-hmm. It's more about having the right questions to ask the customer to help them through the process. Sometimes we just assume they know. Probably most times they don't. And so thinking about what shoes is the customer in and how can we help get them to the right place. Also thinking about how do we message out in a consistent way? Because sometimes they catch one person versus another, they might get a different answer. We do have we will always have a person on those days where we're really focused on review. We have a phone system called Finesse that we put one person on the phones 100% all day with one person on backup. We can measure how long they're waiting for somebody to answer the phone, as opposed to just going to a voicemail and maybe getting a phone call back or not. So the finesse system allows us, we average about, there's an average of about a 2-minute wait for a customer before they talk to a real human. And then we can look up their number through the system and at least give them a status update, which is most of the time when you're in residential review or you're in site development review, you're looking for a status update on, am I next in line? Am I, do I need to wait 2 weeks before I get to review? Those types of questions.
So we get those calls, and our aides can sometimes figure it out. So in the future, when we get those calls, will you give us a number and we can tell people to call that number instead?
Yeah, I'm wondering if it makes sense for us to, and I think we periodically meet with your aides all together. I think that's a thing we
On
do.
Fridays, yeah, we
Yeah.
have aides meetings on.
And so maybe in one of those meetings, we walk through what that process is and who those contacts are, and we'd be more than happy to do that and spend some time doing that.
I think that would be really helpful.
Agreed.
For all of our aides and for us to better serve our constituents.
Yep. Great. Thank you for that suggestion.
Thanks.
We'll follow up on that.
Great, thank you so much. We'll go online to Councilwoman Sulabaca.
Thank you. I have quite a few questions, but I'll try to be quick. First, our CPD permitting process is a pain point across districts. And I'm curious if any steps can be eliminated from the process, because I think that we're doing a good job catching up on the backlog, but I don't know if we're addressing the root of the problem, which I'm hearing is that there are too many steps in the process and our agencies aren't talking to each other in a efficient way. Is there a plan to reassess the process itself and remove steps?
I think we always need to be looking for innovations in our processes. I think we're certainly open, right? As I talked about the innovation methodologies that we take on in any of the work that we do around our process is to always be open to how do we need to show up differently? What do we need to test in our processes? I think, part of the challenge is as we apply zoning code to a development project, small or large, every time there's a new ordinance that layers onto it, it becomes more complex. And so it takes longer. And I think I agree with you, Councilwoman Sulabaca, that the idea of some analysis to look at, is there code that is no longer viable in the 21st century that has lingered in our system, in our code? I think that's a worthy task. We will be starting a text bundle amendment process in June of this year, where all the errors that we catch or the conflicts that we catch in our code, which typically run about 150 per text bundle amendment. We did one about 2 years ago. We will look for that to begin. We already have a list compiled. So if you have any specifics that we could add to that list of what can we remove, we certainly will take a look at that. And then on the agencies, I would note that I think we have an actually great relationship with Dottie, better than we typically than I have seen in other years. We just starting between Adam and I, we have a great relationship. We talk on a regular basis, have a standardized meeting. I also talk with his staff about particular projects that are stuck in one place or another over in his department, and I think we hear it back from their department. So to me, it feels like the lines of communication are open. But of course, if you are hearing other things or have some specific examples, we'd be happy to follow up with you.
Thank you. I do have specific examples. I think there are some issues even with the affordable housing rapid team. We had a huge affordable housing project that was denied a variance for access off of Washington, when just not even a block down, a private developer was granted 3 access points off of Washington. And so I think we need to figure out how to clean up some of those issues and have Dottie on the same page, which brings me to my next question. You say that we're constantly innovating. What exactly are the formal processes for community to engage with their ideas about innovation and streamlining our process?
So we haven't in the past communicated or worked with community to identify those issues. As we are working internally, we see those conflicts. We do have a technical advisory board that meets quarterly, and we certainly have this dialogue every time about what are we missing, where are those areas that we can improve on. From a building code standpoint, we every November, December, kind of late fall, have a convening of with contractors, small businesses, those folks who are at small businesses that are working through our program on a regular basis, and have an opportunity to share out what are the changes that have happened either in the building code or zoning code, rules and regulations. Dottie participates in that. And then also, certainly, of course, there is time for them to provide feedback to us during that convening that happens on an annual basis.
I think that's great. And I would like to recommend that we create an additional process for regular people who are going through to provide their insights and innovation ideas on a regular basis. I also wanted to get a contact list of the leads over each of the priority areas that you had in the presentation. I'm imagining a good plan has a lead on every single one of those bullet points, and our offices could really use that. I've also been asking for an analysis of displacement rates, pre and post neighborhood plans. Has anyone put that together, or is there a plan to put that together?
I'm going to defer to show, yep.
Thanks, Sarah. If you could introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, I'm Sarah Showalter, Director of Planning Services in CPD. So we don't have a specific, exactly related to plan schedule for how we're looking at displacement, but we're constantly doing work and partnering with our colleagues in the NEST office in particular, and also host quite a bit on how to measure displacement, how to try to keep tabs on where it's happening and what are the different factors and forces contributing to it in Denver. So y'all might remember a couple years ago, actually, we rolled out to all of you, we created an online displacement mapping tool that has a bunch of data. Several of you actually gave us great ideas about things that we weren't already measuring that we should add to that. So looking at things, for example, some of the things we added is where demolition permits are happening, where you see big increases in property taxes, and it does capture data over time, including changes in demographics by neighborhood. So we do have a lot of that data available and are always looking. That includes also talking to peer cities about how to, as best we can, kind of measure and get ahead of this trend.
Well, I would love to see us connected directly to our neighborhood plans. And so assessing pre and post plan would be, I think, very important to us, I guess, deciding what pieces of our workload are more important or more valuable to the Denver community in the grand scheme of things. So if somebody could please do that analysis, I would still like it and would be waiting for the list of contacts for each priority area. That's it for my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilman Cashman?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. Let's see, Laura, thanks. I would just put a pin in what the councilwoman was saying. I've asked her this before. I'd love to see an outside efficiency study of the processes in CPD and building. Too many people are working too hard to still have people screaming. I got an email this morning, gentleman's trying to do renovations to his home. He can't get a builder because the builders are telling him it's just too challenging working with our permitting process. So that's that. As far as the NPI process goes, I'm pretty happy with the way the Near Southeast plan has been evolving, but we're going to have two pieces, assuming this moves forward to a council vote as is currently scheduled in the next few months. We'll still await the results of the Evans Avenue corridor study, and it appears that there may be a recommendation in the plan for additional study of how we might implement missing middle portions of housing, duplexes or whatnot, into the Near Southeast plan. So how would we look at that getting done as things move forward?
Well, first of all, thank you for the compliment on the neighborhood plan.
Yeah.
I think we've had a couple conversations with you to make sure that we get it right and to adjust where you saw it was not. We had an opportunity to improve. So I appreciate the conversation and just the relationship and the compliment. On follow-up and implementation, I think that's one of the most important things that we as planners need to also do, right? We need to plan, we need to engage with the community to help them define their future, but then we have the tools and we understand the process and we have the partnerships with the other agencies on those implementation. I would love for anyone to take a leadership role on missing middle. It is strongly discussed in Blueprint Denver. It is a hard conversation to have, and we would love to have an opportunity to talk with you about how that might move forward. We certainly believe that there's a way to do it to keep the authenticity of neighborhoods whole and also address the need for density. As I always say, like the number one problem we have with our transportation system and our sustainability, being able to achieve sustainability, is our land use patterns. So if we can find ways to gently densify neighborhoods in a way that keeps the neighborhoods authentic, I think it's a home run, and we'd love that conversation with you.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess while that's the particular issue that I'm raising, I'm assuming that every plan has something that after the plan itself is voted on by council, that there's some issue that needs further discussion. And I'm wondering, I'm feeling like that should be baked into the planning process. Like, that we're voting on the Near Southeast NPI, we'll say, in May. Then after that, the process continues with a steering committee and so on, and with staff, to look at those additional elements that without which the plan just isn't baked.
Yeah. No, I think those are great points. And the time to do it is right after the plan is adopted, right? You've got the community coalesced, the conversations are fresh. And so I think when we we no longer consider a council adoption date as the end of an effort. It is a terrific milestone, an important milestone, but then the follow-up work towards implementation remains.
Right. Thank you. That's all I have, Madam President.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Laura.
Councilman Hines?
Thank you, Council President. I think I noticed a little bit of work in District 10, just a little bit. So thank you for spending some time in our city center. Also, Councilmember Cashman was talking about the neighborhood plan in his area. I do, while this wasn't 2022, I do want to thank CPD for the work on the East Central Area Plan. That was a lot of work. As you were saying, Councilmember Cashman's plan was during COVID. ECAP was underway, and then COVID struck, and so it was a bit of a uncertainty as to exactly how we move forward. And while we ended up getting an amount of stakeholder input equal to blueprint, a citywide plan, and that was just because we slowed the process down a little bit because we wanted to make sure we were right, and we're very intentional about making sure that we were right in an uncertain time. I also want to thank CPD and you specifically for allowing us to move. So this is 2023. Move further with the East Central Area Plan. We, as we adopted it, we said that we wanted to make Colfax an activated corridor, and now we're in the process, 4 council members together, including me, moving forward in applying the UO8 overlay along Colfax. So I want to thank you for providing staff time for that as well. I know that we kind of just started moving forward and said, come along, CPD, and well, you did. So thank you for that. I know that you are pushed in a lot of different directions. Speaking of the missing middle, just a couple examples of missing middle in the last few years in Uptown are examples of embracing where Denver has come from while preparing for Denver tomorrow. We had Uptown Tavern on Pearl between 16th and 17th, and we preserved the facade along the 17th Avenue. It was an old grocery store back back in 1904, and we preserved that facade, and it went from 1 step to 2 steps, which is frustrating for me. But that's a whole different story. But certainly for historic preservation perspective, I think that was great. And then we're doing something similar in Golden Triangle, where Parsley is, and preserving that facade while adding density, I think 23 floors around it, but making sure that that area and that context of historic context is preserved. So thanks for incorporating where we've come from with where we're going. I noticed you also have on slide 11, you have Acoma Street. You didn't mention it, but I'll call it out because I'll call out the 5280 Trail all day, every day. Thank you for your partnership with the 5280 Trail. I look forward to our conversation here in the next week or so. And then I guess the last thing, and which is the only question that I have, in slide 13, you talked about ADA work, and you don't need to go to the slide, but I know that there has been a conversation recently about making sure that we do ADA reviews in when we change use type or when we build new buildings. And I think the Grant Humphreys Mansion changed use type, and maybe we learned a lesson from that. I wanted to make sure that we were I don't know where the status is with the incorporating ADA reviews in changing use types, but I thought I'd ask since you're here.
Yeah, so I realized probably 4 or 6 months ago, we were having a conversation about a particular project that had an ADA issue, and I think you helped us come together with HRCP and looking at our building code and how, because there seems to be a code in there at a federal level that is not required at the building code level. And so we have been trying to work with them to figure out the way to incorporate that into our reviews. So I don't have a review right now, but I will commit to having an update for you when we meet next week.
Great, thank you. I know that, like, I will go there. D-Bar at 19th and Pennsylvania, the entrance is accessible, but you go to the host stand, and then I have to go back out and around to a side entrance to get into the structure. And that was built maybe 6 or 7 years ago. That was before your time, so I'm not, but it's still something that maybe was missed, and that was a new structure. And then also Sloan's Lake Tap and Burger was also a new construction, and I have to go through an entire patio, and then they have to install a ramp for me to get in, and that was built maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So I just want to make sure that we, as a government, represent all the people, not just convenient ones. And again, that also was before your time. I just want to make sure that we are providing access for everyone. Thank you.
Noted, and we'll have an update for you.
Awesome. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you. Councilwoman Ortega?
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you for the presentation, Laura. I do have a couple of questions. Some of them are just kind of yes, no. Is there were you guys able to segregate out all of the rush of applications that came in right after the EHA was adopted that sort of have those that have been inactive versus those that have been moving through the process? And I know there's this whole question about whether or not CPD should be extending the timeline. I would be supportive of that, but only for those that have been moving through the process. So can you just talk briefly about where you're at on that?
Sure. Yeah, it's definitely a topic of conversation we're having internally. Certainly, as I'm out engaging or getting with the development community or getting phone calls from the development community, that is top of mind for them. That elephant, I describe it as an elephant moving through a python, when there were so many, over 200 submittals, concept SDP submittals that were submitted prior to the July 1st deadline between May and June. That elephant's continuing to move slowly through the python, or elephant's moving through the python. And we are watching our data, right? And I think we just submitted to you all in the last week a memo as required by ordinance to make sure we're keeping a watch on how many are coming through, how many are going out, what's our the new input that we're getting, which oddly is stayed consistent. It's like there was a huge bump, and then everybody just kept moving on at about 30 conceptual site development plans a month. So it wasn't like there was a lull after everybody submitted. It just
But do you have some that submitted but have not done anything with their applications, so that there's a way to segregate those out from the ones that have continued moving through the process and continuing to make sure they've got complete construction drawings and are addressing the input from the agencies?
Yeah, so I would say that we need to take responsibility for the fact that we have only so many staff, and the volume that has come in is much greater than what we have staff capacity for to keep from getting into backlog. That being said, to your point, we don't want to reward bad behavior, and I've had a couple other conversations about how can we identify those, our partners in the development community, because we do need growth to happen, whether it's residential or office or mixed use. How do we, stay on par with those partnerships to make sure that we give them a pathway forward without rewarding those who maybe didn't really have a project put together or the financing put together, but they are just kind of guessing. So we are looking at a range of paths moving forward as to what that might look like, and how we would evaluate whether whether you move forward, continue to participate in the process, and whether or not we need to move the deadline from August 31st back.
So can you keep us posted on where you're at with that as you continue to have those conversations? Some of those people are talking to us as well, and so I think that would be helpful.
Well, not only that, but we will, so of course, we will keep you informed, in part because you will need to vote on it, right? Because it is part of the ordinance. Right. We will be coming back to this body. So we will communicate out to you where we are headed, and certainly be open to having those conversations one-on-one with you.
So I have a couple others, if I can just run
Sure.
through those. Is there a separate team that just looks at small residential projects? We worked with somebody that tried to get a demo permit to deal with a back porch that was falling apart, and it took 9 months to get a demo permit. So if there are those kinds of small projects that there's a separate team working on that is different from somebody working on the large development plans, I think that might help, deal with part of the backlog in the process. Is that something you all have looked at?
Sure. We already have, because they are two different codes, right?
Right.
So site development plan, which are the triplexes and larger, are going to use the International Building Code, which we just updated in January. Residential, so single family and duplexes are going to use the International Residential Code, or the IRC. That is a simpler, more focused code. And we have a team, which when I spoke about residential reviews, that team is dedicated to both. They have to look at the zoning of it, and they have to look at the building code of it.
Okay.
So one of the things that we have done is separate those two. Previously, they had been looking at both building code and zoning code, one person, which is a lot of subject matter expertise to have in your brain. We have pulled those out. The contractor who we brought on is solely looking at the International Residential Code, where our team is looking at zoning code. I'd love to find out about this 9-month, the case that you brought.
I'll
That
dig
seems
it out. I'll dig it out
extraordinary.
and send it over to you.
Yes,
Yeah.
please. That
I
seems
will.
extraordinary, and
Yeah,
a
we
demo
worked with
permit.
somebody on your staff to help get that
Yes,
unlocked.
yes.
So,
Please.
can you tell us what days of the week and what the hours are for the permit counter when people want to just come down and get a
Yep, so-
construction permit?
So one of the, another positive of the pandemic is we realized that we could actually set up appointments as opposed to because we don't want, a line of 30 people all standing next to each other during a pandemic. But if we all have access to online, you can go in and set up an appointment to have a consultation with anyone at the permit counter. And then you don't have to worry about getting a parking ticket. You don't have to worry about standing in a line with a bunch of other people who may or may not have COVID. And you come in for that specific time. So those appointments are available, I believe, Monday through Thursday, 8 to 4.
So for some of our people who don't have access to technology, what is the pathway for them?
So 5 days a week, 9 hours a day, we have at the first window, we have somebody who can help that person, direct them to help set up an appointment. We also still have the boxes that we set up in the early days of COVID, where if you just need to drop off a physical paper plan to be reviewed, we have a drop-off box, and we have form that you fill out of how do we contact you by phone, and then we have a pickup. So we'll still take in paper. It almost is never used anymore. I'll tell you
Okay.
that. Yeah.
Can you tell me where Front Range Rail and the work that's being done by CDOT's contractor that's looking at the development of the Burnham Yard site fits into
Sure.
the work plan with CPD? Because at some point that needs to involve interface with the neighborhoods, and CPD wants to have some input, the city, I should say, in general, wants to have some input into whether there should be, 8 rail lines through there, or whatever that number ends up being, because we know RTD wants more, we know that the railroads want some, and I don't know if Burnham Yards, the Front Range Rail would go through the Burnham Yard site, but if it all ends up just being tracks, then it means there's less space available for development, and I don't know that that's something the neighborhoods are going to be happy about. So just
Sure, and it is a remiss that not to have that in our work plan, because that is a big project for us to be focused on. We are closely aligned in bi-weekly conversations, not just with CTIO and CDOT, who is right now conducting a study on different rail alignments, not looking at it from a land use standpoint as much, but looking really at the geometry of rail and what can and can't work in that area. We're also working in coordination with the Governor's Office of Public-Private Partnership. I'm going to get the name wrong. Latrice Bryant,
Right.
who has an RFP out that I think the proposals are due today to really look at community engagement. I think there's an owner's rep development type, that side of the house. So we are working very closely with both of them. Our work, in addition to coordinating with both of those state agencies, is to conduct a small area plan that will look at Burnham Yard, and we think the study area will likely go all the way to the highway, so west to I-25, somewhere between 13th and Colfax down to somewhere between 6th and 8th. Don't quote me on that, but that's the general area. The only plan guidance we have now for that area is Blueprint, which is recent. And it does note that the importance of preservation of industrial. So we'll need to have that conversation about how Front Range Rail, if it is to go there or somewhere else, and those lines of rail, how does that impact what we said 5 years ago was really important to the city and the vibrancy,
Yeah, and
economic
I
vibrancy.
would think from Dottie, they're gonna wanna be looking at how does that interface with all of, the other technology, RTD, the bus, rapid transit on Colfax, some of those as
Yeah.
well.
Absolutely, yes, and I'm sorry. So we are lockstep with Dottie on this, on both our communication with both agencies at the state level as well as with the small area plan. We will lead the small area plan though.
Okay, and just very brief, the last thing is that all ties into the whole railroad plan. We have a report that's coming. I think Dottie's bringing it forward. David Kaspers from your team has been part of the process every step of the way. I haven't seen all of the recommendations, but that will be coming before my colleagues. And then that will then inform whether or not we make changes to the ordinance that we postponed, and we'll talk about that when it comes in next week, actually. So stay tuned. All right, thank you.
Great, thank you. Councilwoman Sandoval?
Thank you, Madam President. Just want to say thank you to you and your team for working on numerous initiatives, starting with the conservation overlay, my active use centers and corridors, and the Board of Adjustment. Those were all things that you hadn't planned. And so just want to say how important they are. A lot of the things that I think we hear up here will be solved in some of those that we're bringing forward. And how do you plan for something like council initiated time? So that's challenging. I totally understand that. And I just also want to say thank you for the work that you're doing on the accessory dwelling unit. I heard up here last time you were here that we had concerns about that project, and your team responded. And now we're having open houses throughout the whole entire month of February. I just read the report over the weekend, and it's comprehensive. It's easy to digest. It doesn't use so much planner language that someone would read it and say, I don't quite understand what that means. So that's really important when we're digesting things. The work that we've done on the neighborhood planning initiatives, I know mine has slowed down a bit based on feedback from my community. And just want to also acknowledge that I understand the turnover that you've had. I felt it by sitting on some of these committees, and it's not easy when you lose staff that have been here for a long time and get people up to speed. But it is important because I'm also hearing from my community the same concerns that you presented on the slide deck. How long it is to get permitting done, how long it is to get comments back on minor comments that you would hope that would be minor, to make sure that we're getting eyes on those and having the same reviewer look at them, so that you're not like having to have Groundhog Day and have a conversation with someone 5 times and say, here I am, where I am. So I know that this agency, because of the development services
neighborhood inspections, permitting, planning, it's huge. It falls under the constituent services that I think all of us up here receive. I probably don't get, between you and Dottie, those are my two agencies that I have most people who don't quite understand how it works or why is it working this way, and they think that government is, it's a bureaucracy. And so that's what we're here to, is break that down. So just want to say thank you. And as we look to have this conversation with expanding housing affordability and the policy, sooner is better than just having to wait to come back here in a couple months, I would say, because I think we're all are feeling that conversation. And as someone who sat on that task force, I feel very passionate about some of those timeframes, and I understand that we need to be flexible and predictable, and I felt like we did that. So the sooner we can have those conversations, not just saying, hey, we come to this solution, like actually giving me the opportunity to opine on a couple of the solutions would be great. Sometimes sitting on this side, we pass the policy, work on it, then it goes over to your court, to the administration, and then you guys have these sausage-making conversations without us back in those sausage-making conversations. And I think that's when we end up feeling a bit defensive about the work and the policies we've had, because we weren't in those conversations to actually figure out how you got to that outcome. So that would just be my ask, is the sooner the better, because I think all of us up here probably have someone contacting our office about those dates as they come up in July. And just want to thank you for your leadership. We had an opening for a long time in CPD, and you came in and you just took over and you ran it, and you've done a great job. And that's not easy when you haven't had leadership for a long time, when people have been running without a leader. We didn't have a leader at executive director at city council for a while, almost 2 years. So I felt that as well. So just want to acknowledge you as you're probably figuring out your transition plan for the next administration. And however I can be helpful in that, please feel free to call on me. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Councilwoman Sawyer?
Thank you. I just wanted to build off a little bit of Councilwoman Sandoval's comments. She sort of touched on exactly what I was going to ask about. So one of the things that we find in our office is that when there is a zoning issue, there is also a right-of-way enforcement issue, and it usually involves like at least the sheriffs, if not, three, and the police department, if not like 3 other agencies as well. So I'm wondering whether, as you're taking a look at this, sort of strategic vision of where CPD is going, if it makes sense to consider combining right-of-way enforcement and ZNIS. Because it seems like the inspectors, right, like when we get a call from a constituent, we send out ZNIS, we send out right-of-way enforcement, we send out DPD CROs, right? And so obviously the safety departments are a different thing, but like if it has to do with a car, the sheriffs have to go out because they're the ones who do the towing, but they can't go out until right-of-way enforcement goes out and they give the ticketing and the notice, and then we also have to have ZNIS go out because there's zoning code issues on the lot as well, right? So it's never simple. The city is very, very siloed in the processes that we have, but I would say the single biggest cross-process issue that we end up dealing with is ZNIS and right-of-way enforcement. So if we're short right-of-way enforcement inspectors and we're short ZNIS inspectors-ish, I mean, you guys have done a great job of hiring and filling those in, right? But I'm just wondering if that could potentially be considered or be part of the conversation.
Yeah, so I appreciate the comment, and ZNIS not only has worked hard to fill the spots, but to change their culture so that they keep folks, right? Because there's nothing worse than training someone and then they leave. So it's an amazing group of folks who are out there, walking the streets every day, and they're fun and they do a great job. But I think it's a very appropriate for us to have that conversation with right-of-way. I don't know that it's not really cross-training, but it's just being able to be like, hey, this also looks like, and also looks like a right-of-way issue, and how could I more efficiently pull right-of-way in, or vice versa? You're gonna lose some efficiency if you have a team of everybody go out and then they're like, oh, ZNIS isn't needed, and then they're kind of hanging out, right? So I think there's a conversation to be had. I appreciate the comment, and we'll certainly take that back to Shay and Tina to have that conversation.
That'd be great, because I agree with you. I think it's not so much the CPD side, it's the DOTI side, it's the right-of-way enforcement side. They can't fill those spots. Nobody wants that job. It's a pretty bad job.
I mean, it's not a bad
You get yelled
job.
at by people a lot, right, for giving parking tickets and all this stuff. Like, it's not ideal.
Yep, it's a hard job.
So it's a tough job. So I don't blame, certainly there's no blame here in identifying that there's a gap there.
Yep.
But I am just wondering if, our ZNIS inspectors have such an extraordinary knowledge of the zoning code, and it's so in-depth. Maybe being able to fill in the gap on the right-of-way enforcement side, so you just send one, and everybody is trained in both,
Yeah,
would
I
close
mean,
that gap a little better.
We should certainly talk about it. One of the things we've learned from the residential team is that when they have to know both the zoning code and the building code, that is just an enormous amount of information, and it takes a while to get trained on it. So absolutely, we will have that conversation, and we will follow up with you. I'd be a little hesitant to just pile on. And I don't know that I actually have the jurisdiction as CPD to enforce right of
I don't either.
that. So let me follow up with you and have a conversation, like bring Shay into this conversation and see what that might look like. We're always open to thinking about it differently.
Okay, really appreciate that. It's just from our office perspective and what our constituent services piece
Sure, you don't
looks
see
like,
the line. Nobody
right?
sees the
Like,
line but us.
We just, and it feels like we do end up regularly, because by the time someone gets to a council office, it has been months, and they have called 311 25 times and nothing has been done, right? So by the time it gets to us, it's like time to send out everyone, and it feels like maybe there's a different way to do that.
Yeah, fair enough. Note taking.
Really, yeah, so appreciate, oh, look, Siri's finding stuff for me online. So appreciate that, thank you. My other question is really more of a comment, having been one of the few council members that has been lucky enough to have two MPI processes. The East Area Plan I came into in the middle, and I think we have a great plan there that we took our time and changed a little bit, and it is an excellent plan that we use and rely on in our office all the time. Same with the near Southeast Area Plan. I think it's going really well. Lots of people, the community engagement piece is just so much broader. You guys have done a great job of pivoting on that, so thank you. And I just want to stress, I think Councilman Cashman touched on it as well, the implementation piece. I think, a lot of like the DO8 overlay conversation and the ADU conversations, et cetera, are because as council members, once we have these plans, it's a great it's the right thing to do to implement them. It's a great opportunity. I don't know that there is the staffing bandwidth at CPD to be able to do that, because, we've got like Kurt is doing an amazing job implementing the East Area Plan. But he's one dude, right? So and that's a 450-page plan. So I think also as you're looking at the, the potential sort of ways to better enhance CPD's ability to work, the implementation piece and staffing that appropriately to build that in so that council is not doing it, and that CPD is involved without council pulling CPD's focus from other areas would be really great as well.
Yeah, we'll take that under advisement as we move into the 2024 budget.
Awesome, thanks.
Thank you. Councilwoman Kinich?
Thank you so much. I was wanting to follow up, I think, on probably a conversation you were having quite a while ago with Councilman Cashman, and it was kind of what happens at the end of the NPI process, and I wanted to just reference, we've done participatory budgeting now as a city one time, and we did it to put dollars into implementation of neighborhood plan areas, and we also did a citywide process. And, you know, I guess my strategy was that we wanted to keep participatory budgeting going during a big city transition, right? Without, you know, with the mayoral transition happening, I didn't think we could probably handle doing a citywide process in 2023. So my ask, and this council and the administration supported it, was let's keep going with neighborhood plan implementation in 2023. And then, you know, hopefully what we can do is relaunch, you know, bigger and better and continued participatory budgeting in a new administration. So the strategy agreed to was that it would move to community planning and development, and that it would basically pick up the next area plans that would continue. So, you know, the conversation you had, Councilman Cashman, was why don't we just keep going? And you said, we are going to keep going. We do keep going. And so I just wanted to put participatory budgeting into that conversation that you two were having. And again, it was a while back, so sorry, to make you backtrack. But I wanted to ask you, you know, Laura, if you could just kind of pick up that conversation and share your hopes or expectations for how participatory budgeting can fold in to the conversation you were having with Councilman Cashman, and you know, any status updates that you want to share. And it may be that, you know, you're still figuring it out. That's a fair update to have. But I think the community is going to be celebrating actually this Wednesday night. And I think the community's curious. You know, they haven't heard from you since all that budget stuff happens behind the scenes, right? We write a letter, the mayor writes a letter back. I don't know that they've had the chance to hear from you as the Director of Community Planning Development about this program coming into your agency. So I wanted to give you a chance to address it since you're here.
Well, thank you. And yes, I'm remiss for not having commented on the participatory budget during this earlier conversation, but we're delighted to have the opportunity to have participatory budget move into CPD. Obviously, we work very closely with Department of Finance, and we are currently going through the process of setting up the requisitions for the hiring of that position that was made available through your request into the 2023 budget. And we think it's a great alignment with, starting at Comprehensive Plan 2040 and Blueprint Denver and the neighborhood plans, and now being able to have a, this utility player to really be able to work with the community. That's that all that good work that happened in the last year to create this trusted forum for the community to be able to come in and identify where those dollars are going to go and have a voice in that. And so I think that alignment is just, I couldn't think of a better solution. So we're excited about it. Again, it always takes us a minute. We're at the early February. That position could not become available until 1st of January. So we're working towards it, and we'll continue to, we'll fill that position. We feel confident that we'll fill that position, in the next couple of months, and I'll make sure that alignment works.
So can I just play out a little bit of timeline based on your slides then?
Yep.
So you're getting the permission to hire. There's a hiring process. So maybe Q2-ish, maybe the position comes on board. You've got, and we did this before we kind of had your updated timelines for the area plans. So I'm just going to try to build out the timeline from your slides here.
Yes.
The next plan that's going to be completed is the West Area Plan in March or April. So in theory, this new hire could literally begin working immediately on building out a participatory budgeting process that picks up right on the tail end of the West Area Plan to build a voting process. Or maybe they would have two choices, right? Maybe they could, option one would be to do a mini process just for West Area Plan, maybe inefficient to do that. when you've then got near southeast finishing end of Q2 2023. Those are pretty close together. Q2 ends in, I guess, end of May, June? June. So maybe what you do is you do a combined process for those two plans together, and maybe what you do is you run them together. So maybe they're designing a plan, maybe, for those two areas together that gets deployed for those two. And then you run maybe that plan in the later half of 2023 because you don't have near Northwest coming until the end of the year, more or less, is what I'm looking at. It says fall, winter 2023. So that one lags far enough, you maybe don't wait for it. So I'm just, again, I don't want to presume, but I do think that we are going to go through a big transition as a city, and I fear that if our council doesn't stay pretty engaged, as your agency maybe goes through some transitions and the mayor's office goes through transitions, there's a fear in the community this program could get lost in the shuffle. So I just want to play out, does that sound like a possible timeline that your agency might be able to support?
Yeah, I don't, I'm certainly not a subject matter expert on participatory budget and what, from a standpoint of what's the efficient way to implement, I would really want to get that person on board to have that conversation along with that, Kurt Upton's group who goes through the implementation. I guess maybe that's Annalise now, and Kurt who's overseeing the NPIs. But I think there's more voices that need to come to the table on that conversation. I will say I think there's a table of us going this Wednesday to the dinner to celebrate and really have a chance to talk with some of those community members about what their experience was. So again, what I would say to you is we're delighted. We feel like we lucked out in being on the receiving end of that position because it serves exactly what we're trying to do, not just be planners, but make that plan real for the community.
Well, let me just put in this pitch, which is that the momentum is lost if you have too much lag time between the end of the next two area plans in Southeast and West before this happens, right? If your planning folks scatter to the wind and then it's 6 months before you come back to them for participatory budgeting, you've lost that momentum and you've lost that energy. So the lag is not, you don't want to let that lag happen, because the sooner you can just say, we'll be back to you in a month for this planning meeting. You know what I'm saying? You want to be able to keep that momentum. I mean, give them a minute to breathe, but not so long that the email addresses change and that you lose people, right? And so what that means is for this to succeed is hopefully that the hiring doesn't lag and the paperwork doesn't get lost. And I know that's hard. You have a big agency, and every other question that went before me had 82 important asks, all of which are important. But I do hope that we can move right from this plan to the implementation in all the ways you described, for all the reasons my colleagues mentioned, that we want to move from planning to implementation. So that's my pitch, is just if we can keep the hiring moving quickly, then we can move from plan and vision to dollars more quickly. And I just think it'll keep everything like the spirit of like, why did we sit through all these meetings? Now we're spending money. It'll just help it come together in a way that I think will feel empowering for the folks who put in all the time in all those meetings. That's the hope, is that it'll be more rewarding for them at the end if there's less lag. So anyway, thanks for letting me make that pitch. Thanks for taking this program in. And obviously, I think then it may end up somewhere else eventually. This, who knows? The citywide plan hopefully will follow. It may or may not be the best place for that to be housed in CPD, but for these processes, I'm really glad you're going to be hosting it. And thanks for taking it on. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilwoman Gilmore.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you, Laura, for the work plan report. Glad we started this way back when. So I would love to get a follow-up from you all on slide 7 around the 50,000 zoning and neighborhood inspectors inspections that were completed. I would like to see that split out by council district, and then to have it further delineated out, what are the top 3 to 5 issues that they came out for. We continue to have quite a few violations by folks that I think are out of necessity a lot of times, a work truck or a vehicle pulled up on the front yard, on the lawn, et cetera. But, you know, want to also, when you reply with this information, really understand how you're implementing slide 12 that talks about developing customer experience strategy, because I'm wondering if there's a way that we better could inform residents what is allowed, what is not allowed in our residential neighborhoods, to do a bit more outreach and education before a neighborhood inspector comes out. And then I've always advocated, since I've been on council since 2015, that it's not just a knock on the door, hey, you're in violation, can you work on this, etc., but really the city walking our talk around if you need access to additional resources, if there's a economic development connection that we could make with home-based entrepreneurs, et cetera, would love to, I understand that the time is short, but want to make sure that we're getting this on the record so that we can continue around really direct customer service at residents' door and giving them avenues forward, instead of you just got to find a different place to park your work vehicle, et cetera, because we're not going to keep people in our city if that's our stance necessarily. So would love to get a follow-up on this information. Thank you. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Laura, and to your team. Just one quick question before we wrap up today. You created an affordable housing plan review team, and I didn't see that mentioned in the 2023 strategic plan. I know it's multi-agency, but and we can do an info item or just even a one-on-one afterwards, but just curious how that's going. So maybe the short answer, and then we can follow up.
Yes. So the short answer is that was a 5-year budget plan because those are ARPA dollars. So it is up and running. One of the most important hires we made is that administrator that oversees that whole group, including from host to Dottie to parks, fire obviously is involved in that. I think we have had great success with that project. One of the most important criteria or metrics that we use is we meter how much comes into our team, because if you have too much volume coming in, then that's where the backlog happens. So we take those projects that are 100% affordable, and if you are more, if you're reaching more deeply into affordability, you're in, right? So we are backing out. There's a couple projects were already in the process prior to the AHART team being created, and it just didn't make sense. They're far enough along in their own process, so we did not bring them in. There's a little heartburn around that, but again, 2 factors. One, we just didn't think there would be a time savings for them because they were so far enough into the process. And 2, this will only be successful if we can meter how much is coming in. Once you start overloading that team, we're just back into backlogs, and that's not what we're trying to do with our affordable housing projects. I think we have been able to accept almost everybody who hits the marks of 100% affordability. So it's one of our highlights, but we've been successful.
Great. Thank you so much. And just my own thanks for your team's dedication to the West Area Plan as that comes through. It's been encouraging to hear some of my colleagues who have been doing their own area plan also comment on, thank you for slowing down. I think there's been that moment that we had in West as well. So thank you so much. And seeing no one else in queue, thank you, Sarah, thank you, Jill, for being here to represent the entire team. That is our budget and policy today. We will see you in 30 minutes for a council session.
Thank you for the opportunity.